So I'm going to talk to you about handling data breaches, that the issues that arise as a result of that, and what you should do to deal with them. And many of you in the room, I mean, I don't really want to put this test out to the floor, but I'm sure many of you will have come across data breaches already in your own organisations. And some people have dealt with them quite pragmatically, and others have had real problems dealing with them. But let me just try and set the global scene so you can see what we're talking about. I've got the risk-based security slides up there, and it shows really that there are some very significant incidents of data breach over the years. And what's particularly interesting, I think, is the exposed records. And why have we got to such phenomenal numbers? Well, not least because we've heard from Peter about how the hackers get into our systems and really trawl through and grab loads of data. And increasingly, the trends have been perhaps less incidents, but more high-volume data losses as a result of the breaches. So where do these breaches actually occur? Well, all businesses are affected, all sectors. We're still having the larger percentages shown up here globally being in the business sector, and the well-reported cases in retail and financial services you'll be familiar with. But it's not to forget the other sectors. And one of the things in the UK, which may be a trend to watch out for, is NHS and healthcare data, where it's been fairly unsophisticated, if I may say that, for the moment to date, as you will know, Peter, but it's an area to watch going forward. Of course, we've got high reports of hacking, because hacking is the buzzword of the last year. It's not really a new thing, as Peter will have indicated to you, but it certainly hit the headlines. And interestingly, we should be aware that we're not just dealing with hackers. There are lots of other reasons why data breaches occur, and I'll talk about them in a moment. Of course, the highest percentages do come from the States. Is it because they've got the biggest amounts of data? Possibly. But one of the things that is the reason for that is that there's compulsory reporting in the US. So you get to hear about them, and the regulators get to know about them. And maybe David and some other people in the UK don't actually get to hear about them because they're not reported, but the States has mandatory reporting. So as I said, there's a misconception that most breaches are caused by malicious attacks. This isn't actually the case. And the traditional things that we've all heard about, people losing laptops, telephones, USBs, they do occur on a regular basis just because of human error. People get things wrong. They send emails to the wrong places. People still use faxes, amazingly, and we've had some cases reported of hundreds of pieces of data, even thousands of pieces of data from well-established financial institutions being faxed to the wrong people, even in this day and age. But it's human error. But what I would say, and I think the regulators will come down hard on you, that if you don't have your data encrypted, there's no excuse. So if you lose data that's unencrypted, in my experience, the regulators will come down much harder than if you've had encryption in your systems. And also data destruction. If you don't have adequate systems in place by now, well, you really, really have no excuse. Criminal activity is still ongoing because data is valuable. The thieves sell it to people, identity fraud, global issues where data is circulated. It's a valuable commodity. So there will always be criminal activity in various guises. Whether it's stealing computers, mobile phones, we've heard about how easy it is to get into your businesses. Insider jobs. Recently, there's been a few reported cases, even in the UK. Morrison's, the supermarket, unfortunately had an employee steal 100,000 payroll data of its employees. And obviously that caused quite a lot of distress for the employees and the business generally. But it's not unheard of. In fact, it's quite common. And we've heard, I won't go into detail, but we've heard about the sophisticated hacking with virus attacks, malware. When you hear that the bank systems have gone down and the customers can't get access to them, do you think they've been attacked by denial of systems, or do you just think something's gone wrong? A lot of stuff we just don't hear about. The phishing scams and the spear phishing we heard about from Peter gets loads and loads and loads of data trawl through the systems, and that's where the breaches really get to hit big numbers. So here I put a few, hopefully there's not too many people in the room affected by the names up here, but there's millions of examples. Barclays recently, not a lot of data records exposed, but it's quite an interesting one. Let's see, it's under investigation. I can see somebody nodding on the front row, so I won't talk too much about it. But what was really, really, really scary, and it's nothing to do in the UK, it was the Korean Credit Bureau, nothing to do with Experian, where 20 million pieces of data were actually stolen by an employee. And can you imagine the damage that that will do worldwide when that data is disseminated across the globe? We mentioned Target before. I mention it because everybody knows about it and has been involved in it. It was a large amount of records exposed in the States, and litigation is ongoing. There's class actions, there's banks involved, there's people complaining all over the USA, and it really is the seminal retail breach. Adobe, there, big numbers in the USA that were hit, and recently I think it's kind of backup tape being lost. These things happen, but it was quite a significant loss where over half a million pieces of data were lost when ShopperCheck backup tapes went missing. And I know the regulator was pretty hard on them, and they suffer the consequences. Important thing to understand for any business, whether you're big, small, that actually the initial response and investigation has massively cost implications for business even before you get to notify your customers and the public. And that's something that you need to bear in mind, because all businesses affected by data breach will incur quite significant costs in the initial phase. The PwC report there gives some figures, and if you are a small company and you're hit with a 65k direct expense, this isn't liability or fines, it's quite an important cost for your business to bear. And I'll explain in a moment why it is quite cost intensive just to get up and running dealing with the breach. So if you do have a data breach and you get to hear about it in your business, because sometimes it takes quite a while for businesses to realise that they've either been hacked or that they have suffered a data breach, then you absolutely need to put together a crisis management team. I'll explain a bit about who should comprise that team, but that's taking people from their day jobs to deal with this problem, and clearly that's going to have quite a significant cost implication to business. And you will need to engage third-party outside services. You probably will need to engage outside IT consultants or forensic analysis. You will need, even if you've got your own internal PR, you will need to help dealing with the consumer and the press and PR costs. You will need to defend legal claims and deal with the regulator and compliance matters. If you've got your call centre, you might want to employ or might need to employ extra people or outsource call centres for dealing with the customers' matters that comes up, and that's all got a big cost implication. And of course, the usual thing these days where you've got data breaches, the regulators do expect you to offer credit monitoring and ID protection, and that's something, again, which will cost money. So all of that adds up as an initial outlay that you have to provide for as a business who's affected by a breach. What about data breach liability? Well, in the event that you're found to have done something wrong or not stepped up to the compliance regime, then you can be fined by the regulators, whether it's the Information Commissioner's Office, they've got up to £500,000 maximum liability for their fines, or if you're a regulated business, the FCA have unlimited fines. So the penalties from fines can be quite significant to your business. Also, if your data breach involves losing credit card data, then you're going to be subject to, they're not really fines, it's a contractual penalty imposed by the payment card industry scheme. So that's another significant cost that could be imposed on your business. That you will suffer, or you potentially can suffer, claims from individuals who say they've suffered damage or loss as a result of the data breach. We haven't yet had class actions in the UK. This is something quite prevalent in the USA, but you may be subject to class actions if you're actually dealing with data that's got a global impact and your business is a part of a global organisation which has a US operation, for example. And you will need to expend money in trying to repair the damage that will have been done to your reputation and managing the brand to try and control the problem and get it back in the confidence zone for your customers or clients. So all of that, again, adds up to quite significant costs dealing with the data breach. So what do you do if you're suddenly become aware of a data breach in your organisation? As I've said, you need to put together a breach management team, and it's quite important that you do this at the earliest opportunity, so they've got people who know your business, who know the operation, dealing with the impact of the data breach from a day-to-day basis. It's critical that you identify and assess the risk to business. This is kind of pretty obvious stuff, you'd think, but sometimes businesses don't realise they need to work out what data's been lost, what types of data. Is it just in the UK? Is it in Europe? Does it impact in the US? You need to manage and mitigate, because that's what the regulators will expect you to do, to control the problem, to reduce the loss and exposure, and try and get to a place where there's no longer a problem or the problem's ameliorated. And monitoring and reporting, once you actually put some fixes in the system, you need to make sure that you're checking, are they working? Are the numbers affected going down? And is the problem actually being contained? And after all the time and money and effort that you will put into dealing with a data breach, you will need to reflect and see what lessons can be learned for the future, for the better organisation of your business going forward, and the protection of customer data. So the first off then, if you've got the breach in and you're identifying and assessing the risk, you put together a team. You may have planned this in advance, or it may be a team that's ad hoc for the particular purpose. It will need to include senior management because you have to show both internally and externally that you're taking the matter seriously. This is core to business, and you will be reporting to the board, and when the regulator's involved, they will want to see that you're taking it at the highest levels of seniority. You will require IT, HR, you may need operational support in terms of call centres, as I mentioned, and PR and legal, either internal or external resources, will have to go together to form part of the team. The IT director, he's the one who always, or she's the one who always gets it in the neck first off, because they're the guys that are going to have to work out what's been lost, what areas of data, and try and put a quick fix in it to stem further flows of data from your business. You will need to see what the initial customer impact is and what feedback you've had, because that will tailor how you're approaching the breach. And confidentially is pretty important. You don't want there to be a massive panic either within the business or externally in the market affecting your business. So confidentiality and trying to keep the matter contained is pretty important. It's difficult to ensure that this happens, but it is something to try and have in mind when you're dealing with plans and operational issues. Notification to the insurers, if you've got an insurance policy that covers this, it's important that you notify them at the earliest opportunity so you can work with the insurer to make sure that the cover's right and that you're not kind of going off on a tangent and working together with them. As I said, if you lose a payment card information, credit card details, you will need to notify the card issuers at the earliest opportunity. And one of the cases I've recently been dealing with, they didn't actually know that they'd had a data breach until one of the card issuers said to them, hang on, what's going on in your business? We're getting massive numbers of fraud hitting us. And then they realised actually they'd been impacted. So you will need also to engage forensics to conduct a full report, particularly if you've lost credit card details, because the regulators will require this. And we're seeing a lot of clients using forensic, sort of shadow forensic reports to try and make sure that they're checking what the PCI report comes to conclude, because you can get fined, or you will get fined by the PCI based on the numbers of data lost, and you probably want to check this to try and see if you can contain or reduce the fine. Notification at the earliest opportunity is essential. If you're a regulated business, you will need to notify the FCA. If you're not a regulated business, then you have an option whether to notify or not, and you'll hear from David shortly about what he expects. But frankly, if you're going to notify the FCA, you might as well notify the ICO as well, and it's best practice to notify, and in the future it probably will be compulsory to notify, but currently it isn't. If you suspect a crime is being committed or there's fraud involved, then you should notify the National Crime Agency and cooperate with the investigations there. You will need to put a very practical operational plan in place to deal with the internal ramifications. You might need to train people. You will need to put in a call centre, either to enhance your existing one or outsource it. And you also need to have an eye on your ongoing business and brand. With that in mind, the customer communication plan is critical. You don't want to alarm people unnecessarily. You don't want to notify everybody who's not affected. And working with the regulator to make sure you communicate properly with them, whether it's by email or correspondence, have the hotline available, and that you're offering them a comfort package in terms of credit monitoring is pretty important. Its PR plan also is quite critical, so that you've got consistent statements on your company website, media handling, and any interviews that you do with the press. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to contain the customer alarm and regain brand confidence in the market. Once you've got these things going, it's absolutely essential to make sure that you're monitoring whether it's working. And what we want to see, and what the regulators want to see, is that the problem has been contained, that the numbers of data losses being reported have gone down, that the credit card fraud is going down, that the thing is actually being controlled by you having implemented plans and systems to make sure that you've put a plug in the leak, as it were, in terms of the data losses. Could be quite difficult to do, but it's important that you regularly report to the regulators. There we go. The FCA, who I'm regularly dealing with, they want to know sometimes on a weekly basis what the numbers look like. Then they want monthly reports, and then eventually they back off when they realise it's under control and that the risk has actually stopped. And I'm sure David will explain what he expects from the ICO perspective. Corrective action, implementing this at the earliest point is essential, not only to contain the problem, but also by way of mitigation, so that you don't end up with great claims out there because you haven't done anything about trying to reduce the exposure to your business. And monitoring media and websites is quite important. Apart from the funky hackers that we've heard about from Peter, people do actually have a lot of dialogue out there about what systems have been breached, how they've done it, and the feedback that you can gain and customer reaction is quite important to inform you about what plans you should put in place and how you control this breach scenario. Third-party claims, it's also important to make sure that you're able to deal with these. So defending claims that come in from people saying that they've suffered loss or damage is quite critical. Also, the PCI fines, as I said, or claims, you can manage in some way if you've got your own separate forensics to analyse the numbers involved. And lessons learned. Once you spent all this time and money and had the panic, you really, really need to do what I've put up there, the ATP, which is review your administrative setup and policies, the technical issues, and the physical security. All of that adds up to trying to improve, going forward, your security and your enhancing the abilities within the business to deal with any future breaches. Staff training, important part of the policing of risk management and contingency planning, and you probably might need to improve the staffing in these areas by recruitment. Communication is critical. It'll take quite a while to get business confidence back and consumer trust, and you may need to do advertising campaigns or just improve your website issues to make sure that people feel that you're now a trusted business having suffered the breach. As I said, reviewing handling of claims. Will the customers that had their data lost feel comfortable coming back to you? Did you actually give them a positive reaction in dealing with the data breach issue? You might reflect, did you have adequate insurance? Did it cover the expenses that you really expected it to cover? And if not, on reflection, maybe you should take out some further cover to try and ensure that your significant hit to the business isn't repeated. And be sure that just because you've had a data breach and then you've managed it, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be hit again. The chances are you will be. People will test you to see if you've put fixes in place, and so you need to be ready, because if you're caught out a second time, the regulators really will come down hard on you if you haven't fixed the problems that were identified to you first time round. So I'll leave that with food for thought, but I know that David's going to give you his views going forward. Thank you.